Okay then. I think we are recording. Is this working? Hello and welcome to question and answer number 181. I am your host, Panyo Basa. This is my beverage. And you may notice that I'm not in the studio. And that is because my fair mate, my sweetheart, is in there, I hope, working on the cover art for my next book. Which is pretty much done. It's just like the cover and maybe a little bit of the front matter and the back matter still has to get done. You know, like I gotta apply for a copyright number or something like that, or the ISBN, whatever that is. So hopefully within the next couple weeks, I'll have my fourth published book out, not including the Atakawaga translation that doesn't count. And yes, indeed, 181 is a prime number. So that's the last 2 out of 3 have been prime numbers, which is nice. And let's see here. I am speaking to you from the middle of the tail end of a blizzard, I guess. It's the most snow I have seen in South Carolina since I moved here. It's maybe 5 inches at present, but it's still snowing. And I guess I should just start answering questions, of which we have kind of the lower end of average number of questions, kind of like in the high 20s, something like that. So it shouldn't be an extremely long one. For those of you that don't like extremely long ones, I think you might be in luck this time. Of course, I could just go off on tangents and digressions at any moment, like bitching about the new Star Trek, that kind of thing. Gay Klingons. But let's just answer questions at the present time. And the first question is from Romeo. And Romeo says, I am currently reading your essay, The Tribal Native, from your excellent book, Buddhist Ethics, Buddhist Practice. In the essay, you say that you have a, quote, cool heart, unquote, and, quote, a lack of regard for my own species, except for a few friends and the occasional beautiful female, unquote. I identify on both counts. I've always had a slight aversion towards the average normie, though this has improved somewhat with age. I'm looking for ways to further increase my capacity for caring and overall regard for other people, and wonder if you have any suggestions. I know that there is metta meditation, which I do, and has helped me somewhat in this regard. There's also the sentiment behind the expression, quote, love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart, unquote, from the poet W.H. Auden. In other words, when any kind of social aversion creeps up in me, I try to remember that I am not perfect and have my own shortcomings like everyone else. Other than those two things, metta meditation and recognizing I am imperfect like others, do you have any other practical tips for someone to increase their regard and compassion for others? Question mark. So, Romeo is asking me how to be less misanthropic, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, I've improved with age also. I've never really hated, he says he's always had a slight aversion towards the average normie. And I'm not sure, I mean, once you know an average normie personally, or at least in my case, I mean, they're just another person. You have like a rapport. There's sort of like an empathy. So that in my case, I just didn't have use for human beings in the abstract as a generalization. You know, just the human species, especially when I was younger, I really didn't have much use for. I preferred the companies of trees to humans as a general rule, with the exception, as he quotes from my essay, you know, a few friends and the occasional beautiful female. But I mean, just because I can get along with the average normie. I mean, I grew up in the midst of average normies. I grew up in like a blue collar town, blue collar neighborhood, and just, you know, it was like there weren't a lot of scholars or intellectuals that I was hanging out with, even getting up into college, really. So I've always had a kind of appreciation for riffraff. In fact, one of the essays I wrote, I don't remember which book it's in, if it's in any of them, is just on the merits, the advantages of associating with riffraff. Because when you're amongst riffraff, so to speak, that they just accept you for who you are. You don't have to be fake. For example, when I was in college, I went to a University of Washington party. A friend of mine went to the University of Washington. I went to visit him. We went to this party. And at the time, it might still be the case, the UW was like the most prestigious university in Washington State. I mean, there's no Ivy League schools there, that kind of thing. So I go to this party, and it's a bunch of like young preppy types just kind of like posing, projecting an image. It's like they're practicing for like some corporate cocktail party. And I mean, Iowa came from like Aberdeen, it's this blue collar town, like a logging town. And there, I mean, people might get in fights occasionally, but at least they're being themselves. They're being like genuine, authentic humans. And they go to a party to have fun, not to like pose and project an image. So, I mean, my father was the same way too. He tended to associate with riffraff, for lack of a better word, at least for lack of a better word that I can think of. So, I mean, there are certain advantages to that. I mean, for me, I was like a prince among riffraff. By associating with riffraff, they kind of looked up to me, or at least a lot of them did. I was the only party animal in high school that was in the honor roll, for example. But getting back to Romeo's question here, the main thing I think that has helped me to have a higher opinion of the human race is I spent 30 years trying to perfect myself, just trying to become a saint, trying to reprogram myself. And I realized that you're pretty much just stuck being who you are. Trying to become a different person, like Schopenhauer was continually saying in his works. I mean, it sounds nice in theory, but it just doesn't work that way. When you got someone who's insisting that you got to be more this way and less that way, or they're going to withhold their affection, or just wash their hands of you or whatever, well, I mean, that's pretty much on them, really, because as a general rule, people do not change that much. I mean, you can sort of make slight modifications, but any major radical change it's pretty much necessitates some just profound crisis, some crash. And then you can reprogram. I've talked about this before. I've mentioned Battle for the Mind by William Sargent, which is one of the most important books I've ever read. It'd be like in the top 10 with regard to really modifying my outlook on the world. And he says that, I mean, it's just an instinct in higher vertebrates, not just humans, that we are governed by habit. We're just set in our ways. We're just kind of locked in. And so long as our habits get us through life well enough, then we resist change just at this subconscious, unconscious, instinctive level. And what really requires, and what is necessary for change is you have to hit this crisis where your habits are just not dealing with the problem anymore, where you are just crashing out hard because you just cannot deal with the situation. Like Chinese thought reform was based on this. A lot of like Stone Age or hunter-gatherer manhood rituals, or basic training, especially in like elite military forces, where they just grind you down until you're like this quivering mass of jelly, and then just build you back up into a super soldier who will not hesitate to obey an order. That kind of thing. A lot of religious, like being born again, is based on this same principle. So anyways, getting back to Romeo's question, I mean, I realized from 30 years of practice that changing yourself and not being a messed up, mortal or whatever, I mean, it sounds good in theory, but as a general rule, it just doesn't work very well. At best, you can do like Jung says, And if you're going to get rid of some major mental force, you have to replace it with an equal mental force. For example, it was known in the old days, almost the only cure for alcoholism, which was called dipsomania back then, was theomania, or becoming a religious fanatic. So, I mean, I have a lot of compassion now for the average person, because the average person hasn't spent 3 decades trying to perfect themselves, based on this exalted ideal of Dhamma. They're just trying to get along as best they can. And so, I mean, if I couldn't modify myself, if I couldn't reprogram myself into a saint, then how can I expect others to be saintly or just not mess up? It's just, I have more sympathy for the human condition now, more compassion and empathy for just people being born into this meat puppet. So there is that. And as you get older, I think you just pick that up gradually. I think that's one reason why, as people get older, they tend to become less misanthropic, at least in many cases, like in my case, and according to Romeo, in his case also. But also, another thing is, it was after I dropped out of the monkhood and started working again, working for a living, that I started appreciating that just the average guy, I'm got a blue-collar job. I'm among blue-collar people. They probably got C's in school, if that. If they were on any sports team, they were probably second string or junior varsity or something. Might have gotten picked on at school. They might have been unpopular, a lot of them. And they just get a job out of high school, and they just train at it and get good at it until, within a few years, they are skilled at a certain kind of work that most people just can't do. It's like driving a semi. Most people could not back up an 18-wheel semi truck. They couldn't back it into like a parking slot, at a loading dock or something, or running certain machines. Just the average person is what's running the world, really. You've got the really brilliant people who are inventing things and innovating things, but it's just the average person who's driving the trucks and stocking the shelves and, selling whatever it is that people are buying, that kind of thing. Or just building the cars, building the buildings. It's just average people doing that. And I have a lot more appreciation for that after coming back to America and seeing that, almost everybody who has a job is specialized in a certain way, so that they're good at this one thing, and they're kind of an authority or an expert at this one kind of narrow bandwidth of the full spectrum of, what runs society. And so I have more of a respect for the average guy. He's working 8-10 hours a day. His kids don't see much of him. His wife might not see much of him. His wife might have a job too. And he's just working and working and working. Sometimes it just is drudgery, just for the sake of supporting his family and all that. And I have respect for that. It's the curse of Adam. You must earn your bread by the sweat of your brow, and so forth. So there's that. And also, as I've gotten older, and just partly through my monastic practice, that I have just more automatic empathy. You just kind of feel what the other person is feeling to some degree. There's like this us entity that you can tap into, and there's just like this almost like telepathy going on. And everybody's got that to some degree. Even animals have that to some degree. So all of that kind of helps me to be more compassionate and have more so-called Christian charity towards other people. And Christian charity isn't like making donations. Christian charity in the old-fashioned sense is just accepting people as they are, faults and all, warts and all. And reading Dostoevsky helps, I suppose, because he specialized in portraying people very realistically with all their faults and warts on full display. And he had a profound respect for his fellow man, partly because he spent a few years in like a Siberian prison colony with like hardcore criminals, like murderers and rapists and so forth. And he could see that even in them, there was like this tenacity and like courage. There were certain like strengths and certain qualities that were even admirable, even in like a mass murderer, that Dostoevsky had the sensitivity to kind of appreciate to some degree. I mean, he wasn't denying that they belonged in prison and they had killed children or whatever, but still, I mean, he could see the human condition and have sympathy for it. So, yeah, I mean, even like reading Dostoevsky's The Idiot, for example, or Crime and Punishment, something like that, it can help a person maybe have a little bit more Christian charity for their fellow human. And I guess some of it, you just get mellower with age. That helps too, I suppose. And as for meta meditation, I never really liked it much because it just seemed too artificial. That for me, genuine metta has to be spontaneous, that you don't cultivate it so you can turn it off and on like a faucet. Some people it might work, but I think a lot of people who practice metta meditation are just sort of like LARPing, they're pretending, they're just getting this warm feeling of benevolence, but it's just sort of like isolated and, it's not really being applied to real life. And then when the real life situation comes, that metta meditation has little or no influence on their attitude. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't do metta meditation, but for me, it just didn't work very well because for me, it just has to be spontaneous. So it's like you try to cultivate spontaneous metta at all times just through various ways that I've already been discussing. So I guess I should just move on to the next question. And this is from the saboteurs, who may or may not be more than one person. And the saboteurs say, what are the karmic effects of self-deletion if you are not in any serious pain? I knew someone who topped himself because he couldn't get a girlfriend. So again, this is the kind of question that people frequently ask, what are the karmic effects of this action? What are the karmic effects of that action? Is doing this right or wrong? Do you get bad karma for this? And like I keep saying, it's like the actual physical act is ethically neutral. Just a mere physical act produces no karma at all. The karma is the mental state, the accompanying mental state. So if somebody auto-terminates, so to speak, I mean, if they do it in this frenzy of just despair and anguish and self-hatred and so forth, then they're going to be making a lot worse karma than, say, some samurai who, let's say, he becomes Ronin because his master, his daimyo, has been killed in a civil war or something. And so he just considers it his duty to finish himself off. Or like Cato the Younger, who opened his veins or had his doctor open his veins, so to speak, when Julius Caesar was winning the Civil War and it became obvious that the Republic was coming to an end in Rome. So, I mean, if you do it for philosophical reasons, let's say there's this intelligent, relatively wise person who realizes he has got some terminal health condition. It's not going to get better. He's just going to get worse and worse. And so he decides, well, might as well just put an end to this. So, in a case like that, and he does, he does the research and knows what kind of medication to take or whatever it is that will cause him to just go to sleep and not wake up. Like Venerable Jnanavira, who was an eccentric, very intellectual British monk living in Ceylon in the 50s and 60s. He auto-terminated with using ether. And so with something like that, it's just like an anesthesia. You just go to sleep and you don't wake up again. So, I mean, it's going to depend the karmic effects of self-deletion or auto-termination, if you're not, whether or not you're in any serious pain, I mean, it's going to depend on your attitude, you know, what your motivations are, how you feel about what you're doing, that kind of thing. I mean, if you're just like, can't stand it anymore, it's just too horrible, it's just bleakness all around, just, you know, depression and just despair and all that, then, I mean, you're going to be taking that with you with your karma. I mean, that's just creating this karmic imprint. And especially, I mean, if you self-delete in some dramatic way that's going to have you just like in this state of emotional charge, you know, jumping off a cliff, for example, then it's going to have a lot more effect karmically and just influencing your next life than just, you know, taking too much of a certain substance, which makes you fall asleep and not wake up again. When you just for like philosophical reasons. I mean, it would be difficult to do it with no bad karma at all, with no unskillful mental states at all, because it's difficult to do anything with no unskillful mental states at all. Anything motivated by attraction, aversion, or semi-conscious stupidity, which is essentially unenlightenment, is going to have some negative karma associated with it. And so anything that an unenlightened person does, with maybe very few exceptions, is going to have at least a tinge of unwholesome karma associated with it. So I suppose it's possible for a fully enlightened being to auto-terminate, in which case there would be no karmic effects at all. I'm not sure if there are any cases in the texts of a fully enlightened being auto-terminating, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were. I mean, there's cases like Godika in the Godika Sutta, who became enlightened while auto-terminating. And of course, there was no karmic effect of that because he became enlightened at the moment of death. On the other hand, some people can just be very messed up going into their next life because of just the horror of their mental states at the time of their self-deletion. So it just depends on the mental state. And I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Austin. And Austin says, non-differentiation entails monism. If everything is fundamentally one, is knowledge and ignorance undifferentiated? Lies and truth also? Question mark. Well, non-differentiation doesn't necessarily entail monism. It's like, it reminds me of the Sin Sing Ming by Sosan. At least that's his Japanese name. He's the third patriarch of like Zen Buddhism. Third Chinese patriarch anyway. And he says, all you can say is not two. So, I mean, monism, it's like emphasizing oneness. But, I mean, if you emphasize oneness, then that oneness, in order to have any meaning, has to have a contrast of not oneness. You know, it'd be either nothingness or multiplicity or whatever, and still you're kind of stuck in dualism. So I think Sosan had the right idea, and not even insisting on monism, not even insisting on the one, just by saying all we can say is not two. So if everything is fundamentally one, is knowledge and ignorance undifferentiated? Yeah, I mean, knowledge and ignorance would both be mental states. And if everything is fundamentally one, there wouldn't be any mental states. So, I mean, there'd be not only undifferentiated, but they wouldn't even be in the picture. Lies and truth also, it's the same. I mean, you can't have lies and truth without mental states. So, I mean, if everything is fundamentally one, I mean, in reality, at the ultimate level, you've got non-differentiation. Then, yeah, there'd be no differentiation between lies and truth. I mean, there would be no lies and truth even at that level of reality, at the ultimate level. Lies and truth, neither one of them would have any validity. It'd be meaningless. Because in order to have lies and in order to have truths, you have to have differentiation. And you wouldn't have truth without untruth. You wouldn't have untruth without truth as perceptions. Just like you wouldn't have knowledge without ignorance, and you wouldn't have ignorance without knowledge as perceptions. And that's the only way they really exist, is as perceptions. To exist is to be perceived. So I'm going to move on to Austin's next question, which is, why does the universe obey equations we supposedly invent? Well, the universe doesn't obey equations. It's the other way around. It's like the universe does what it does. Let's say somebody throws a ball, and then you've got some physicist who is like measuring the arc, and then he's coming up with a mathematical equation that can map onto that arc more or less. But it's not going to be a perfect fit because, I mean, with regard to throwing the ball, there's going to be other factors besides, perfect gravity on a perfect flat plane. There'd be like friction with the air. There'd be like slight gravitational effects of like the sun and the moon interfering with the gravitational pull of the earth and all this, so that the equations that the physicists come up with are abstract. And it's like they just observe reality, or they observe empirical reality. And then, if they're a physicist or a chemist or some sort of statistician, maybe some of these ecologists, they'll like come up with some mathematical equation that fits what they observe as closely as they can. But that doesn't mean the ball is obeying any law regarding like parabolic arcs when you throw the ball. It's just that these equations are cooked up by mathematicians or scientists who do math, and it comes as close as they can find to what they observe. And it doesn't fit perfectly because there's like so many variables involved that, it's like they're in abstraction, they're isolating this one force of say, gravity. And then they're just dealing with that. But the universe doesn't really work that way. Maybe it does if you could isolate all the variables. But in the empirical universe, the variables aren't isolated. It's just this soup of all these different conditions. So, yeah, the universe just does what it does, and then scientists will come up with equations that they can map onto the observed data. And I'm just going to move on to Austin's third question. I think Austin doesn't like monism very much. I just get that impression. But anyway, Austin says, logic seems to constrain any possible thought, not just human thought. If logic was generated by the mind, how could it not be the case that contradictions could be true by different conventions? Now that's a difficult question. I gotta read that second question again. If logic was generated by mind, which seems pretty obvious to me that it is, how could it not be the case that contradictions could be true by different conventions? Okay, so he's saying if logic really is just a kind of mentally generated, abstraction, then how could contradictions be true by different conventions? Well, apparently Austin doesn't know anybody who's like a New Age follower, a New Ager. But to a lot of these New Age people, contradictions, A and B, even though they're mutually contradictory, can still be considered true in their world. So again, though, let's see. Any kind of multiplicity is generated by mind. Logic is a matter of perception. So, you get rid of the mind. You get rid of logic. You get rid of any kind of proposition. How are you going to have, like a syllogism? Is that going to be a valid syllogism or an invalid one without any kind of perception? You got to perceive it. I got a dog looking at me now because she wants to be sitting in this chair. She likes being in this chair, chewing on stuff. Like, oh, here. She likes chewing on these. Here you go. And she grunts when she likes something. So let's see here. Did I answer the question? It's Austin and like many other people. I don't want to just pick on Austin. There's lots and lots of people in this world. Probably most of them, if you really kind of question them about their attitude. It's like they try to understand reality, and it's like they want to know what reality is like without human psychology interfering, let's say. So they kick human psychology out the front door and then just immediately sneak it back in through the back again. That's what scientists try to do, although since quantum theory and theoretical physics came along with the idea that the perceiving mind is influencing systems, then even this is getting weak in physics, even though it's still, like a biologist or a chemist is still trying to understand what the world would be like, through the eyes of God and not just through the eyes of people. And really, they're just trying to get rid of human psychology, and then they can't. And so they just have to sneak the human psychology in through the back door immediately, because they can't imagine anything without human psychology, especially if human psychology is creating multiplicity. And you have to have relations to have multiplicity. In order to have multiplicity, you have to have contrast. And contrast relies on relations. Same as, different from, especially. Those are like the two main ones. And there is no same as or different from out there in the world outside of a perceiving mind. Like I've said before, a chemist can analyze a sample of matter. He can divide it down into its constituent elements. He's never going to isolate any pure same as or any pure different from. Those are purely psychological. And without those psychological elements, there's no differentiation. There's no contrast. Unless you want to just sneak human ape psychology in through the back door and pretend that it's not there. And some people, when they're trying to understand reality, in a way, that's like the first mistake, because you cannot figure out reality. You cannot understand ultimate reality intellectually, symbolically. All of your thoughts are symbolic, and a symbol isn't the thing that it represents. It's like this abstract, weird attempt to portray what it's trying to represent, and it doesn't do a very good job. Just the idea of a tree is very different from an actual tree. Assuming that there is an actual tree, you can't even prove that. Take away all the mental states, the tree disappears too, for all intents and purposes. I used to think it was all intensive purposes, but then I realized I'm pretty sure it's all intents and purposes. So, let's see, did I answer the question? Before I move on to the next one, I really want to really answer these questions if I'm able to. So, logic seems to constrain any possible thought, not just human thought. I suppose. It doesn't constrain New Agers' thought. A lot of Christian thought, it doesn't constrain. A lot of fundamentalist Christians will think that the Bible is absolutely 100% true, even though the Bible itself contains contradictions. So, okay, that's kind of the easy sentence in this 2-sentence question. The second one that has the actual question mark. If logic was generated by the mind, which presumably it is, how could it not be the case, or just forget the case, how could contradictions not be true by different, it's for some reason, some sentences like this, it's hard to wrap your head around the actual meaning, although I think I've already answered this. If logic was generated by the mind, how could it not be that contradictions could be true by different conventions? Contradictions can be true by different conventions. If you just got an irrational convention, for example, no problem. Or even, I've pointed this out before, the Coca-Cola bottle. I don't have a Coca-Cola bottle handy. I've got this glass, purchased from the Dollar Tree. But that's not good, because it's glass can have two different meanings. Forget that. All right. How about, okay. How about this? This is a coaster made of wood. So it's a coaster and it's wood. But coaster doesn't mean wood. You can have coasters made out of other things, like cork, for example. And obviously, anything made of wood isn't necessarily a coaster. So coaster and wood are not synonyms. But this is coaster and wood simultaneously. It is A and not A, because coaster and wood don't mean the same thing. Not necessarily. There's a teensy bit of overlap. But coaster does not mean the same as wood. Wood does not mean the same as coaster. So wood and coaster are not the same. They have different meanings. But this is both at the same time. It's A and not A simultaneously, which violates the Aristotelian laws of thought. A cannot be not A, but this is A and not A. This is coaster and wood, with A being coaster, let's say. But I mean, it might be seen as a kind of paradox, or you can try and work out. Like I did mention that there's a teensy bit of overlap, so that's why they're not contradictory. But really, it's like two entirely different levels of truth. It's form and function, or essence and function. Let's say essence and form, substance and form. The substance is wood. The form is a coaster. So it's just two different levels of truth. But I don't know why I'm wallowing in this. But different conventions, I mean, obviously, you've got some conventions that see no problem with contradictions. And just leave it at that, I suppose. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Arpad. And Arpad says, about the 500-year prophecy. And before I get any farther with the question, he's referring to this notorious prophecy made by the Buddha when his aunt and stepmother, both the same person, Mahapajapati Gautami, she wanted to be a nun. She wanted to be a fully ordained Buddhist nun, and there weren't any. So she was following the Buddha around, asking him, please let me be the first nun. Please ordain me as a nun. And the Buddha just kept refusing. He said, don't even go there. Just don't even bring it up. It's not going to happen. So she was just kind of following him around, his tears in her face and just dust in her hair. She'd just be standing silently outside of his door, just kind of silently protesting and grieving that the Buddha would not allow the ordination of women. And then his cousin, Ananda, who also had the family name of Gautama, his cousin Ananda, who was also his attendant, talks the Buddha into it. He used mainly the argument that persuaded the Buddha was, Ananda said, well, can't women become enlightened just like men can? And the Buddha had to admit that they can. And then he said, all right, we'll ordain women, but now you've done it. Because now that the ordination of women is going to be allowed, the true Dhamma will exist only half as long. It will exist for only 500 years instead of 1,000 years. And so now it's not very popular among people who support Bhikkhuni ordination and so forth. They'll just say, well, that must never have happened. That just got added later or something. But there are a number of possible interpretations of this. And Arpad is going to come up with another interpretation that I haven't really considered very much. And so let's go back to the question now. Arpad says, about the 500-year prophecy, could it be possible that since the ordination was open to the other half of mankind, or people kind, therefore doubling the potential number of enlightened beings, the amount of time required to reach that number was proportionally divided? So Arpad is actually turning this into a good thing. It was obvious that the Buddha didn't want to do it. He thought it was a bad idea. And when he got talked into it, he tells Ananda, all right, but now you've done it. Because, he was not praising Ananda for talking him into doubling the amount of enlightened beings in the world. So, that's just for starters. But it's also true that, maybe not until modern times, in the modern West especially, that you're going to have roughly proportionate numbers of men and women practicing advanced spirituality to the point of enlightenment. I mean, that's mainly been a man's game throughout most of history. I mean, you're always going to have prophetesses and nuns and priestesses and female shamanesses and so forth. And some of them, presumably, assuming that people get enlightened, some of them were probably enlightened. But it kind of reminds me of that saying of Nietzsche, where, I mean, he was, in a way, he kind of was jealous of women, or sort of wished that he could just spend his life just thinking about clothes and food and children and gossip instead of dealing with the heavy issues. And I think women are, especially like historically and traditionally, more inclined to just go with the flow of samsara and just spend their life taking care of kids and talking about food and clothes and gossiping at the back fence, that kind of stuff. And men, I mean, they've been like the supporters of religion. You know, they've been the ones who feed the monks and so forth. But for the most part, it has been men who have been doing most of the heavy lifting. So I think that Arpad, I mean, it's kind of an interesting interpretation, but clearly when the Buddha was saying that the true Dhamma was only going to last half as long because of nun ordination, he didn't think it was a good thing. You know, he obviously considered it to have been a bad idea. So I don't think that he would consider doubling the amount of enlightened beings in the world to have been a bad idea. It was just going to cause more trouble than it was worth, presumably. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Terzaskaziz. And Terzaskaziz says, do monks living alone who really practice eventually start to believe in their own greatness? Maybe like Jnanavira, who had written the exact date when he became a Sotapanna. Yeah, Jnanavira is the person that I mentioned in answer to the first question, or second question, I think, who self-deleted in Sri Lanka or Ceylon, like around 1965. Do monks living alone really practice eventually start to believe in their own grace? Some of them do. And a lot of Burmese Seatos who don't live alone, and they might really practice, but I mean, they've got disciples, you know, they're the abbot of a monastery, maybe a famous monastery with lots of lay people coming to visit and making offerings and so forth. They're treated like kings who are just infallible oracles for so long that a lot of Burmese Seatos apparently start believing in it. You know, they start considering themselves to be infallible oracles. You know, kind of like a certain German painter who became chancellor in the 1930s, who was so successful at the beginning of a certain war that he kind of started considering himself to be like this chosen man of destiny and essentially infallible. And then he started micromanaging the military and making mistakes and so forth. So, I mean, you don't have to live alone to start believing in your own greatness. Some monks live alone and they just stay humble, or they just don't think about that kind of stuff. But others, I mean, they start thinking that they've really attained something. And I mean, you don't have to live alone to think that. I mean, it might be even easier if you're with other people, because then, you know, if they think you're great, then that reinforces your own idea that you are great. But a lot of what I've experienced, especially Burmese people, because I was dealing mostly with Burmese Buddhists for most of the time that I was a monk, they'll have some weird experience, some breakthrough in their meditation, and they think, that's it, I've become an Arya, I've become a Sotapanna or something. And that happens a lot. Some Westerners do that too, and some of them were just clearly kind of nutty. But they're just sure that there was this one guy, he came to visit me, and I was staying at a school monastery near Mandalay at the time. And as soon as he walked in the door, I knew there was something not quite right about this guy. It was just like this look in his eyes. And, you know, at first we sit down and we're having like this normal conversation. And then he just starts like quoting suttas that I'd never heard of, that I think he was just making up, like the demons hanging from a horse's tail, this kind of stuff. And then he starts talking about how he was in this meditation hall and this dragon from the center of the galaxy started coming towards them and he was going to like devour everybody. And then it was, I can't remember if it was him or the leader of the meditation group that says, "Do not be afraid. The power of our samadhi will protect us." And sure enough, the dragon didn't eat them. So, I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And this guy was sure that he was an Arya. But anyone who knew him was generally be just as sure that he was possibly schizophrenic. But that doesn't mean that you can't be both. I would assume a lot of very advanced spiritual practitioners have been nutty by modern Western psychological standards. In fact, William James, in his classic book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, starts off pointing out that some people, like, I think it was George Fox, the founder of the Quakers, I mean, he was a wise person, but he was also nutty. Or like Saint Teresa of Avila, founder of the Discalced Carmelite order, who was apparently a meditation master. Her disciple, Saint John of the Cross, obviously considered her to be very highly attained in all this, but she was having so many visions of like demons and so forth that her father confessor just told her to make the sign of the cross whenever she'd see a vision or hear a voice or anything like that. And she got so tired of making the sign of the cross all the time, she just started carrying around a crucifix and was just holding it up whenever she'd have the vision, which was apparently several times a day. So, I mean, whether you're alone or not, I mean, if you're alone without feedback, sometimes you can drift in weird, eccentric directions. So that is more likely. The believing in your own greatness, that can happen either way. And I don't think being alone would necessarily increase the odds of that. Like there's the Bahya Sutta, which is one of my favorite suttas in the Udana 110, I think it is, where Bahya lived alone in the forest. He wasn't a Buddhist. He was living on like the west coast of India. But people were revering him so much, considering him to be enlightened, that he started thinking maybe he really was enlightened. Until some deva, who was a close relative in a previous life, came and visited him and told him, "No, you're not enlightened." So, yeah, even monks living alone, they still have to deal with lay people, and the lay people might start thinking that this monk is fully enlightened. That happened to me a few times, a few places in Burma. People started thinking I was an arahant, mainly just because I was minding my own business, meditating out in the forest, and I didn't handle money, and I didn't sit around smoking cigars and drinking tea with the village guys like most of the other, like the village monks were doing. So, yeah, with regard to Jnana Vira, I mean, Ajahn Mun also, in his, I think it's his autobiography, he like listed like the times and places of all 4 stages or all 8 stages, because each stage of being an Arya has like the path and the fruit, so it's like broken up into two events instead of just one. And he had it all worked out, exactly when and where it all happened. So, I mean, Ajahn Mun's case, I mean, I don't want to second guess Ajahn Mun, but he was kind of like the Saint Teresa of Avila type, where just apparently he was having lots and lots of weird visions and so forth, in addition to being highly advanced in meditation and so forth. So, have I answered that question? Sometimes I just answer and answer and answer, so that I wind up answering like 5 or 6 questions, and most of which weren't even asked. I think I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to Cherzaskaz's second question, which is, do you have a new job? And the correct answer to that is not yet, although I am looking, and I have received some interesting offers, like 2 main ones. One would be working on a trim brake again, which is something I was really good at. and I kind of enjoy doing it. And then but that's a little farther away. And then there's this one that maybe I could get. It's neither one is finalized, but both are still open-ended. Another one is building crates for a place that's just really close to here. It'd just be a few minutes drive. I could almost practically walk there. And the crates are for like large wind turbines that are being shipped overseas. So they got to be very precisely made to specifications and so forth, which I think wouldn't be as interesting of a job, but the pay is kind of equivalent or comparable in both cases. And so one has the advantage of being very close to home, and the other one has the advantage of being something that I'm already good at and kind of enjoy doing. But I don't have a new job yet. Although I might make a little bit of extra income from this fourth book that's going to come out within the next couple of weeks, Memoirs from Myanmar, which is going to be mostly autobiographical stuff, stories about my time spent not only in Burma, but also in America and Indonesia as a monk. So I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from PSA. And PSA says, aren't you sometimes amazed at how immensely, monumentally, inconceivably, indescribably, immeasurably stupid human beings really are? Only 0.1% are worth listening to, while 99.9% are hilariously incompetent, astronomically retarded, and spectacularly wrong about basically everything. The human realm could be summed up as a few contemplatives and everything else is nothing but simps and hoes. It seems cosmically embarrassing to be part of the species. If the universe had a carnival, humans would be the main attraction, the ego freak show segment. How did they survive this long? How we survived this long, I suppose he should have said. Paradoxically, if humans were too smart, we all would have gotten enlightened by now. It is stupidity that keeps the theater going. Watching the human show is like watching a drunken, horny, bickering pack of apes accidentally inventing fire. Thoughts? Well, I really do not completely, even at my worst, at my most misanthropic, as like a teenager or someone in my early 20s, I really was not this extreme in this despising of the human race. Because, let's see, how stupid human beings really are. Obviously we're infinitely ignorant. Any being with a finite intelligence is going to be infinitely ignorant. But we are the smartest beings on this planet, presumably. There might be dolphins that in certain ways are smarter than us. It's like I did a research paper on intelligence in bottlenose dolphins when I was in college. And apparently they can communicate like two different messages to two different dolphins simultaneously. One like through repeating like a sonar echo. It's like they send out this pulse of sound through a kind of sonar. It comes back to them modified, and their sonar is accurate enough. They can tell the difference between heads and tails on a quarter from 5 feet away and in opaque water, that kind of stuff. So all they got to do is just send what they received to a different dolphin, and it's just like sending a picture instantaneously. Well, to a different dolphin, they can be like doing the clicks and stuff, sending a different kind of message to a different dolphin at the same time, which is sort of like talking and texting at the same time. And they got a larger, more convoluted brain than us and so forth. So, it's possible that in certain ways, other animals may be more intelligent than us, may have higher IQ than us in certain ways. But still, we are relatively intelligent. And even though it's a tiny percentage of the people that are like the Galileos and the Thomas Edisons and, the big inventors who are really changing things. Elon Musk, I suppose, could be included in that these days. Tesla. Nikola Tesla, not the car. that I mean, they're the ones who are inventing this stuff, but still, like I was saying in response to an earlier question, you've got just ordinary, just average, mediocre people who, they dedicate their intelligence to mastering this one little sliver of what, the bulk of human knowledge. That, they specialize in that, and they do well enough at that civilization keeps going. So people aren't that stupid. I mean, we are infinitely ignorant. Let's see here, but let's just get a little farther here. Hilariously incompetent? No, I mean, not really. I mean, if we were hilariously incompetent, then civilization wouldn't have gotten as far as it has and still be going strong, apparently. Let's see. Spectacularly wrong about basically everything. Well, I mean, even the geniuses, the inventors, would be spectacularly wrong about basically everything if you're going with ultimate truth and not just this samsaric matrix that everybody is wallowing in. Let's see. It feels cosmically embarrassing to be part of the species. I mean, well, how do you know what other species? Let's say there's other planets with other intelligent races. They could be even stupider than us. Or, I mean, most species on this planet are stupider than us. Maybe not as neurotic as us. I mean, you have to get a certain level of intelligence just to be messed up. Or at least to be spectacularly messed up. So, yeah, if the universe had a carnival, humans would be the main attraction. No, I don't think so at all. Let's see, how did we survive this long? Yeah, he doesn't include himself as a human, apparently. How did we survive this long? Well, partly, I would guess, is that we really didn't have the power to destroy ourselves up until relatively recently, with the invention of nukes and spectacular forms of pollution, that kind of thing. I mean, now we might have the potential to really wipe ourselves out, which is one reason why Elon Musk wants us to colonize space as soon as possible, because he knows a lot of our limitations and knows that, he's maybe read enough science fiction too to know that so long as you got all your human eggs in one basket of Earth, then the whole race can get wiped out by just some maniac pushing the wrong button. Whereas if you've got space colonies, then even if the world is destroyed, you've still got some human race going. So let's see here. Watching the human show is like watching a drunken, horny, bickering pack of apes accidentally. Well, I mean, is PSA one of the 0.1%, or is he one of the laughably incompetent, retarded apes? Apparently, he considers himself to be one of the refined, ethereal elite or something. But yeah, I mean, we are what we are. I mean, we started off, we're like an upgraded ape. So, I mean, compared with what we used to be, compared with Homo erectus, I would say that we've made a lot of advancement. And it all balances out. The positive and the negatives, the pluses and minuses, the good and the bad, all balance out through the law of dualism. The law of subjective equilibrium, as I've sometimes called it. So, yeah, I mean, probably PSA is still young. He's still in his more misanthropic stages. But by the time he gets to be an old man with gray hair, then there's a good chance that he'll have a little more Christian charity and compassion and empathy and so forth. So let's just move on to the next question. This is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha says, Narendra Modi uploaded a video titled, Why the Return of Bhagawan Buddha's Relics is a Defining Moment for India. What is your response to this when historically Hindus have had a rivalry with Buddhists and claim the Buddha to be an incarnation of Vishnu that would teach people adharma and lead people astray from the Vedas? Could this be a tourist attraction rather than genuine admiration and honor to Gautama Buddha? Well, first of all, Narendra Modi is a politician, so a lot of what he says, no doubt, is for public relations, just to project an image, I suppose. Also, in India, the Hindus won, so they can afford to be magnanimous towards Buddhism now. Buddhism is no longer their mortal enemy, like no longer their primary rival. Nowadays, it'd be more like either Islam or communism would be more of a rival to Hinduism in India than Buddhism is. So there's also that. I mean, that kind of religious Cold War that was going on between Buddhists and Hindus in India for so many centuries. I mean, it's past history now. So you can afford to be magnanimous. But also, I mean, India has nowadays India does take a certain amount of pride. Like the flag of India has got that wheel on it, which, I mean, to some degree it's inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's spinning wheel. But also it's inspired by the wheel of Dharma, the Buddhist wheel of Dharma of the Emperor Ashoka. So, I mean, the Emperor Ashoka he was like one of the ideal rulers, at least in the minds of the people of India and of the world, I suppose. He was like a stereotypical virtuous ruler. So, I mean, I don't think that Hindus, certainly not all of them, consider Buddhism to just be this horrible, blasphemous heresy, anything like that anymore. They might have at one time, and probably many of them still do. Like you find certain like social media threads where you've got, hardcore Hindus just bashing away at Buddhism. Just like you got some Christian threads in the West bashing away at anything that isn't Christianity. So let's see, what did I answer the question? Could this be a tourist attraction rather than genuine admiration and honor to Gautama Buddha? Well, it's probably a combination of both. At least a little bit of both. But I'm not a mind reader. I really don't know what Narendra Modi's motives were for saying what he said. But yeah, I don't think that there's nearly as much of an axe to grind against Buddhism among Indian Hindus as there used to be. And so now they can kind of relax and, be magnanimous, as I've said like 3 times at least. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Yoshibui. Oh, and this is a Nagarjuna question. I don't have the fez. Damn. Anyways, Yoshibui says, did Nagarjuna not claim that a thing does not arise from itself and it does not arise from another? I came from my mother. Does not that constitute arise from another? It's been years since I've read the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, and I do seem to recall that one of the first issues was not whether a thing arises from itself, but whether a cause is the same as the effect, whether the effect is the same as its cause, which kind of is similar to this. It might just be a reinterpretation of this issue. So, I mean, the argument, if I remember correctly, if the effect is the same as the cause, then, there was no change. But if it's different from the cause, then, it wouldn't need the cause. It could just arise randomly or spontaneously. That was like the arguments. And then he rules out both, and then he rules out neither, because the whole purpose of the bulk of the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, at least one of its main themes, is just asking these philosophical questions and then ruling out all possible answers using logic chopping or whatever it's called. Just like dismantling, just shooting down any possible answer and then just leaving like emptiness behind. But whether that's a different question or a different issue that was dealt with in the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, not is an effect the same as the cause that caused it, but whether a thing arises from itself. Well, obviously a thing couldn't arise from itself. Then it would already have arisen. But if it doesn't arise from itself, then I don't know what the argument would be. I'm sure that Nagarjuna had some clever argument if this issue is dealt with separately from the cause and effect issue. But, if it's arising from something, then what it arises from would be the cause, presumably. So I think this is just sort of a rephrasing of that preliminary issue dealt with in the Mula Majjhimaka Karaka, that if it arises from another, that then I mean you don't even really need the other if they're qualitatively different. And nowadays you could have a logically minded person could kind of shoot down a lot of the Mula Majjhimaka Karaka's arguments. I think what the Mula Majjhimaka Karaka is trying to say is still valid, but I mean you could just say it's the same substance but different form, that kind of thing. So let's see here. So I'm not saying that everything Nagarjuna says is necessarily true. I think he was aiming at a certain goal and using certain logical tricks or logical arguments to support that goal. And I think the goal is a valid one, really, that, partly that everything is just sort of conditionally real and not ultimately real. I mean, that was one of the main arguments, and that's just central to Buddhist philosophy, that objects do not have an individual inherent self-existence, that they just exist conditionally upon causes. And you take the causes away, and this supposed entity also disappears because the causes that cause it disappear. So if you came from your mother, does that not constitute a rise from another? From a conventional point of view, I suppose it does. Although you'd say that, I mean, the elements came out of your mother, so the elements were the same. It's just they assumed a different form. I mean, you could use that kind of argument nowadays. But I don't think that it's really a wise use of time and effort to really try to wallow through ancient Indian logic that, I mean, formal logic was still in its early stages back then. And I mean, especially in Theravada, sometimes if you read like the Kata Watu, which I think is the third book of the Abhidhamma Pitaka, it's pretty much the only readable book in the entire Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is using like arguments to shoot down the philosophical views of other schools of Buddhism. So pretty obviously it arose after the time of the Buddha, because other schools of Buddhism that are mentioned in the Kata Watu didn't even exist in the Buddhist time. But I mean, some of the arguments used by the Theravadins are much worse than the arguments used by Nagarjuna, just because formal logic just had not been established in Indian philosophy yet. It was better in Nagarjuna's time, but still not perfect. But I mean, the main point that he was trying to get at is still true, in my opinion. And he was using like the best logical tools available in India at the time to demonstrate his point. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Xenothoid. And Xenothoid says, if no philosophical system or language can ever reach ultimate truth, does this mean that they are simply tools for achieving different goals? Not necessarily. I mean, you can still have the goal, a philosophical goal of reaching ultimate truth. I assume there have been philosophies that really were just aiming at ultimate truth, but they just can't do it. They just can't get there. At least not from my point of view or the classical Buddhist point of view, unless, well, I guess from an Orthodox Buddhist point of view, you'd have to say Abhidhamma is ultimate truth. So that would be a philosophical system that does arrive at ultimate truth from the point of view of, say, a Burmese Abhidhamma scholar. So let's see. Yeah, I would guess that most philosophical systems, I mean, yeah, there's different philosophical systems will have different goals. I mean, some philosophical systems are just trying to find meaning to life. You know, like existentialism, you know, it's not really dealing with metaphysics much. It's just dealing with ethics What should you do with your life? How should you live your life? That kind of stuff. A lot of ancient Greek philosophy was like that. Some philosophical systems are kind of nihilistic. They're just trying to show that you can't, or like skepticism, for example. You can't know anything. So, different philosophical systems will have different emphases and be moving in different directions. And all philosophy is not created equal. Ethics and metaphysics, for example, or even like aesthetics, what is beauty, this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I don't think that all philosophical systems, I don't think any philosophical system or language can reach ultimate truth. And so probably the most sophisticated philosophical system is one sort of like Nagarjuna was doing, where you're demonstrating that you can't reach ultimate truth through intellect. Like Immanuel Kant was doing that most famously in the West, I think. So let's see, does this mean that they are simply tools for achieving different goals? Not simply. They are tools for achieving different goals, different emphases, like ethics versus metaphysics, logic, that kind of stuff, epistemology. So different philosophies will have different emphases and be moving in somewhat different directions, having different goals. But I don't think that it's, even if, some philosophies really are trying to reach ultimate truth and they just can't do it, including Abhidhamma philosophy. So, kind of yes. The answer to that question is kind of. And I'm moving on to Xenothoid's next question. He says, assuming yes to question 1, would it be accurate to say that Hinduism is the tool to achieve pure being, Buddhism is the tool to achieve the unconditioned, and Jainism is the tool to achieve pure non-being? Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think like the wisest, the most advanced spiritual systems within Hinduism and the most advanced spiritual systems within Buddhism, they're both going for the same enlightenment, the same realization of the absolute, so to speak. It's just they use different language to do it. Jainism was more of a primitive, archaic kind of system where in Jainism, you've got a jiva or a soul that is weighed down with all this sticky karma. And so you're just trying to exhaust the karma, to burn off the karma you've already got without adding any new karma to your jiva so that it can float up into heaven. So that's what the Jains are trying to do. There still are. There's still a few million of them. So, yeah, I think that Hinduism, it's the most advanced schools of Hinduism and Buddhism, the most advanced spiritual traditions, I do think that they're essentially striving for the same goal. It's just they're using different language to explain it and somewhat different techniques for getting there. But it's like knowing God. It's like the Buddhists wouldn't use the word God, but still, it's just different words. It's just different descriptions that are imperfect and they're not really going to apply to the absolute anyway. So let's see. I'm not sure. Let's see. I thought I had made a note at the bottom of one of these and now I'm not seeing it. Oh, okay. All right. I'm going to get there still. So, and we've been going for a little over an hour already. So, but we're over halfway done. So we should be done within 2 hours, I think. Maybe. So I think I answered that one. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Fifth. And Fifth says, do you have any thoughts or opinions on Sadhguru? He is extremely popular and I see him everywhere online. He has followers who cry and kiss his feet and made the announcement that this is his last life. He is kind of like a neo-Hindu and focuses a lot on Adi Yoga. Yeah, I've seen a few of Sadhguru's videos. Isn't he the one that's was riding a motorcycle across the country at one time? Maybe he does that regularly. I'm not sure. But I really don't know much about him. I would be skeptical of any claims to his full enlightenment, but who knows? I really don't know that much about him. But his followers who cry and kiss his feet, I mean, that's what Hindu devotees do to their gurus, regardless of who the guru is, in many cases. But yeah, I really don't know enough about Sadhguru to really make any kind of even educated guess about him. So I'm just going to move on to Fifth's next question, which is why or how did the Bhikkhunis go extinct? So yeah, the Bhikkhuni Order, the order of fully ordained nuns in Buddhism, in Theravada Buddhism, the Bhikkhuni Sangha, went extinct a few hundred years ago. There's claims that they went extinct several hundred years ago, but still there's mention of Bhikkhunis in Burma, like late 1600s, maybe even early 1700s. But eventually they did go extinct. And there's different reasons for that. One reason is that nuns were not allowed to live in forests just for their own safety, because there was like bandits, bad men living, men with toxic masculinity living out in the forest. And so there's a rule preventing nuns, bhikkhunis, from living too far away from inhabited areas, living out alone in the forest. They can go out there to meditate, but they got to come back and sleep at the convent, I guess you'd call it. And then because of that, at times like in India and other places where you would have like an anti-Buddhist king who's persecuting the Buddhists, the Bhikkhunis, because they were not, there weren't any or very few hiding out alone out in the forests, they could get persecuted into extinction more easily than a lot of like cave-dwelling hermit monks out in the forests. So that was part of the reason. But I think a more important reason is that the rules for bhikkhunis are much stricter than for monks. And part of the reason for that is just to weed out women who are just trying to escape from an asshole husband, a bad marriage, bad family situation, and join the Sangha without really having a true spiritual calling. So the rules are much stricter. For example, you've got 4 parajika rules for monks, that if a monk breaks any of these 4 rules, he's automatically excommunicated from the Sangha for life. Nuns have 8. In a few cases, the rules are easier for nuns. Like nuns are allowed to cook their own food just because they didn't get the same amount of respect from the people as a general rule, which is still the case in Burma. Although, there aren't any real bhikkhunis in Burma that I know of. But nuns just don't get the same kind of respect. And so they had certain privileges, like being able to cook their own food, that monks were not allowed. But because the rules are so strict, sort of discriminating against nuns, that it just sort of discouraged enough women to become fully ordained nuns. They just prefer to be like an 8-precept nun or a 10-precept nun that isn't fully ordained. And that was good enough. And that continues to be good enough in places like Theravada Buddhist Southeast Asia. It's just kind of weird to me that in the West, you've got people just campaigning to revive an order that blatantly discriminates against women for the sake of gender equality. And so what they do is they claim to be fully ordained bhikkhunis, and then they just don't follow the rules very well. So what's the point of becoming a bhikkhuni unless you just want the official status? But don't get me going on a rant about postmodern attempts to revive the Bhikkhuni order. I've been told that in Burma, any woman claiming to be a bhikkhuni can go to prison for it. And it's just common knowledge in Burma that the Bhikkhuni order is dead. Like, before the Patimokkha recitation every 2 weeks, approximately, at a monastery, one of the duties that's in the text is you have to exhort the bhikkhunis. And so in the preliminaries, like the introductory verses that are chanted before you start reciting the Patimokkha, you have to say, there are no bhikkhunis. And so the exhortation to the bhikkhunis is just kind of a moot point. But they mainly went extinct because they were more visible, because they could not be hermits living out alone in the forest. And so at times of persecution, they would get persecuted more than the monks would. Then, plus, of course, there were never as many nuns as monks, never nearly as many nuns as monks. So any kind of bottleneck is more likely to wipe them out than wipe out monks. But also, just because the rules were so strict, just to weed out the nuns that, women that just wanted to get away from the asshole husband and live an easy life, that it just became more and more prevalent in Buddhist countries that women who wanted to renounce the world would just become like an 8-precept nun or a 10-precept nun and just didn't bother with the extreme strictness of being a fully ordained bhikkhuni. And so the Bhikkhuni Order went extinct a few hundred years ago. And so I'm just going to move on to Fifth's third question, which is kind of an interesting one. He says, I was wondering if you had any favorite time periods or wars in history. I was a history major myself, and I am always curious about which topics people gravitate towards. Well, the Second World War is interesting, very important one, just historically and culturally for us nowadays. When I was younger, I was more interested in ancient Greeks than Romans, but as I got older, I became more interested in Romans than Greeks. So, yeah, it's like sometimes I'll watch YouTube videos about famous battles, and gosh, probably half of them are Roman. You know, late Republic, early Empire, that kind of thing. Like feudal Japan interests me. Medieval Europe, like the 100 Years' War, that's interesting. Frederick the Great of Prussia was a military genius, allegedly. So it's like the 7 Years' War, which manifested in American history as the French and Indian War. That's been of interest to me. What else? Yeah, those would be the main ones, I think. I mean, a lot of like interesting, like Indian history, they're not as detailed in descriptions of battles and so forth. But like India in the Buddhist time is fascinating to me, and I've studied that a lot. Although you don't hear much about battles, and if you do hear about battles, you just pretty much hear that there was a battle and this side won, because they don't really go into details about, you know, how the wings were set up. Lately, I've been studying up a little bit on Epaminondas, who was a Theban general shortly before the time of Alexander, who was considered one of the great military geniuses of history. You know, he started the asymmetrical battle line, where he and the Thebans defeated the Spartans after the Spartans being undefeated in a major land battle for centuries. He came up with this system of an asymmetrical battle formation where all of his best fighters would be, you know, like at least half of them would just be on one side, and then they would move forwards, and then he'd tell the other, like the center and the right, to just kind of fade back and avoid fighting. And so they just steamroll one side and then just wrap around and just wipe out the enemy army, or just defeat it, send it into a rout, that kind of thing. And Frederick the Great of Prussia, he learned from Epaminondas, I think. He was using some asymmetrical battle formations also. But yeah, like Ganges Valley in the Buddhist time, Roman Empire stuff, especially, or late Republic, early Roman Empire. Ancient Greece is fascinating. Feudal Japan and medieval Europe are like some of the main ones. And some periods in history, some cultures just do not resonate with me at all. Like Mesoamerica, I've rarely had any interest at all in, you know, like the civilizations of Central America and South America, that kind of thing, for some reason. Also ancient Egypt. I mean, sometimes just like watching videos on new developments in like understanding the pyramids and the secret passageways and that kind of thing can be interesting. But just ancient China. I mean, I've read some of the strategy, like the military manuals, military strategy manuals of like ancient or medieval China. That kind of thing is kind of interesting. But assuming that there is such a thing as rebirth, then I think I was more likely, like participated in the late Roman Republic, feudal Japan, medieval England, that kind of thing, and of course India. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui, and Rui says, "Do you think the timelessness of Dhamma, akaliko in Pali?" I'll start again. Rui says, "Do you think the timelessness of Dhamma can be used as a temporal wormhole of sorts by means of sati or recollection? Concepts such as now or moment and even instant seem rather clunky, but timelessness, although it is just another word, seems to generate a certain inner atmosphere more conducive to an experience of the unconditioned, particularly when the narrative mind begins to fade, but the perception of wakefulness is still palpable." Gosh, I think I need another drink of the primary designated beverage. Maybe timelessness is more effective in describing a timeless situation, partly because it's a negation. Just like unconditioned is a kind of negation. Unconditioned means not conditioned. Timelessness means, not time or not in time. So yeah, Buddhism does seem to prefer negations to assertions with regard to describing like profundities. Not this, not that, although that's Upanishadic. So let's see here. What's the actual question? Where's the question mark? Do you think the timelessness of Dhamma can be used as a temporal wormhole of sorts by means of recollection? Yeah, if it works for you, then go for it. Anything that works. You got to be pragmatic to some degree. If it works, then keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, then try something else. But yeah, timelessness, it does seem to fit the Buddhist approach better than more positive, assertive kind of words, because it's more of a negation. It's just kind of, yeah. So let's see, what else is, there's something else in here. Eventually, if you want to understand akaliko or timelessness or eternity, or, the power of now or whatever, you just do it practically. You just, when you're doing your mindfulness meditation, you're just emphasizing the present moment. And when you get really good at mindfulness, every moment is the only moment, and you don't really even have a concept of time. You even kind of move beyond impermanence, because if every moment is the only moment, you don't even really perceive impermanence, because every moment is the only moment. In order to perceive impermanence, you have to compare one moment with another moment, and then you're not being fully in the present moment. So, yeah, if it works for you, then go for it. And timelessness is, it's rather literal translation of the Pali word akaliko. So that's fine. And I'm going to move on to Rui's next question here. He says, "Here is a rare and more pedestrian second question brought about by the fairly stiff weather we've been experiencing on the Lusitanian seaboard." That's Portugal, for those of you who don't know what Lusitanian means. Pretty sure it's Portugal anyway. "Does extreme meteorology energize you at all?" Yeah, it does. Especially when I was a monk, living in a semi-desert area of Burma. When there was rain, sometimes it would just be this torrential downpour, just electrical storm, the whole sky just flashing like a strobe light, just pissing down rain, just roaring. And times like that, I just couldn't sleep. It's sometimes you just go outside and watch the lightning and just watch the rain. But yeah, I'm like a human barometer. This changes in barometric pressure do have a significant effect on how I feel. And stormy, really kinetic kind of weather does have a kinetic effect on me. I really do like observing storms, and it just makes me more energized. Not just the static electricity in the air from the lightning, but just the violence of it, and just the radical changes in the atmosphere that cause changes in my body, and then in my mind also, my spirit, you could say, that it does have an effect on me. Although just a week ago, the state I live in, South Carolina, was declared, it was a state of emergency. And the storm came through, and I didn't even notice it. I mean, there's like no sound. It was just like this silent, still kind of a storm. It was just, it snowed a little bit. And then I guess the state of emergency was caused by freezing rain, that it was going to cause like a thick crust of ice on like power lines that could get so heavy that it could snap the power lines and break trees and so forth. But I mean, it was like the biggest non-entity of a storm or a state of emergency that I've ever been through. But even right now, it's snowing outside in South Carolina. We've got about, maybe at this point, as much as like half a foot, that's 6 inches of snow outside, which is nice. Not for the dogs, though. The dogs don't like going out there. Two of them are little dogs, and the other one's a princess, and neither one of them particularly likes going out in 6 inches of snow in order to go potty. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. And we are kind of getting down there. We're getting down towards the bottom of this scroll. This question is from Mr. Pranav. And Mr. Pranav says, if you had to be a devotee and worship a mainstream Hindu god, and then he's got in parentheses Krishna, Ram, Shiva, Vishnu, Kali, Durga, etc., which would it be and why? And I have to admit that I've always kind of gravitated towards Shiva. I've got more veneration for Shiva than for Vishnu. And of course, Krishna and Ram are just avatars of Vishnu. Kali and Durga, they're just consorts of Shiva. And Kali, I mean, I've known some New Age people that were really into Kali. And I did a little research on Kali. And Kali is mentioned in the Pali text, but she was just sort of like a demoness. She was like a relative of Mara back then. And up until modern times, I think it was like 16th or 17th century Bengal that Kali sort of graduated out of just being some demoness that haunts battlefields and actually became some sort of metaphysical super deity. Some personification of some kind of ultimate reality. But then again, Shiva also, I mean, he started off as Rudra, who was like a storm god in the Rig Veda. So, I mean, if you're going to be a deist along Hindu paganistic lines, I would have to admit that it's just sort of a personification that, I couldn't really take seriously all the legends. You just look into the history and you see, just like with Jehovah in the West, that the God evolved over time. Like Jehovah started off as El, god of the Canaanites, or one of the gods of the Canaanites, who had a wife, and then he got conflated by some Moses-like figure with Yahweh, who was like a Midianite or Edomite god, and then they had to dispense with the consort, this kind of thing. And you look at the evolution of the Hindu gods, and it's similar. So I couldn't really be a literalist with regard to any of them, but just with regard to the vibe, and of lesser importance, the music, I prefer Shiva to Vishnu. Shiva has better music than Vishnu, hands down. And just sort of the destroyer god. Shiva is like the ascetic, he's on Mount Kailash in deep meditation, this kind of stuff. That he's, I don't know, just something about Shiva appeals to me more than Vishnu does. Vishnu is more of an Apollo type. Shiva is more of a Dionysus type. And for whatever reasons, I just kind of resonate better with Shiva. But I'm not planning on converting to Hinduism at any foreseeable future time. And I'm moving on to the next question. This is from Robert. And I hope that this is loud enough. I'm sitting farther away from the microphone than usual. And so I turned up the audio mixer a little bit. But I don't know if you might have to turn up the volume on your computer or whatever you're watching or listening to this on. But you already know that because we're already well over an hour into this. So Robert says, to what extent do you think one should avoid philosophy, as engaging in it might just be wallowing in superficial conventional reality and therefore lead one astray? Well, by golly, this question reminded me of a quote by David Hume that I really like. And so I'm going to quote David Hume here. David Hume says, "The most perfect philosophy of the natural kind only staves off our ignorance a little longer, as perhaps the most perfect philosophy of the moral or metaphysical kind serves only to discover larger portions of it. Thus, the observation of human blindness and weakness is the result of all philosophy and meets us at every turn in spite of our endeavors to elude or avoid it." And that kind of reminds me of Nagarjuna also. So it may be that your best use of philosophy from a practical point of view, well, I mean, there's more than one benefit to philosophy. One benefit of philosophy is you're sort of, to use a Buddhist metaphor, you're knocking out a big peg with a small one. You know, it's like you got the carpenter, he's got this peg that's in a piece of wood. He wants to drive it out, so he gets a smaller peg and drives out the bigger peg. So in a way, you're substituting something more exalted for something more crude, as just an intermediate step. So replacing foolish ideas with wiser ones, even though they're not fully enlightened ideas, I mean, that's not bad. And so long as you're not fully enlightened, you got to believe something. You have to have some kind of model. You have to have some kind of conceptual, world view. And so to have a philosophical one that emphasizes morals and a goal of increased wisdom and less reliance on thought and ideas and so forth, I mean, that's good. But also logic, that kind of intellectual philosophy, one of the main benefits of that is for use as a bullshit detector. It helps you to identify foolish ideas and avoid them. But you got to believe something, so you're better off believing a relatively wise philosophy than just a foolish, worldly lack of philosophy. You're better off, having a subtle metaphysic than just being a naive realist and just take everything that you experience at face value. This is all ultimately real, in which case you're just pretty much stuck in samsara. So a philosophy that acknowledges that this is not ultimately real, that's fine. I mean, you use it as a tool. You don't just rely on that as truth, like some fundamentalist religious person. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. But you use it wisely, in a loose hand, not a clenched fist, an open hand, without clinging to it any more than you have to, I suppose. And then it can guide you. I mean, Dhamma is philosophy, and it guides people to, kind of helps them to disentangle themselves from samsara, but ultimately you have to let go of it, just like Nagarjuna's philosophy. You use Nagarjuna's philosophy to shoot down all other philosophies, and then you turn it on itself until all concepts are gone, and there's just this emptiness, this voidness that's left behind. So, if you're really going for it, like the early Buddhist monks following the Atthakavagga, where you're just already relatively advanced, you've already renounced the world, you're already practicing relatively advanced austerity and meditation, then you may not need philosophy anymore. Then you can just let it go. But if you haven't gotten to that point yet, you might still need some philosophy, at least to help guide you towards a more advanced state. A philosophy that has a more advanced state as an ideal is going to get you farther than not having any philosophy at all, and you're just wallowing in samsara. But ultimately, you have to let go of it. You got to let go of everything. And I'm just going to move on to Robert's next question. He says, the Buddha avoided some metaphysical speculation, undeclared questions, but to what extent do you think philosophy and metaphysics can be useful in a normal day-to-day life of a Buddhist? Well, I pretty much already answered that one in my answer to the previous one. So let's see, what else is there to say on this? What extent do you think philosophy and metaphysics can be used in a normal day-to-day life of a Buddhist? Well, I mean, ethics is a branch of philosophy. So ethical conduct, use Buddhist philosophy as a guide to ethical conduct. You can just take the word for it, like malicious gossip. I've got this situation going on in my home now where there's this person that my sweetheart and I both used to watch and like, Styx, Hex, and Hammer, 666. And lately, it's like he's crashing hard. It's like half of his videos, he's obviously drunk now. At least it seems like he's obviously drunk, like bobbing his head around and slurring his words and this kind of thing. But then my sweetheart is watching this other show that's like, it's kind of like malicious gossip or like mockery of other people, including Styx. And it's from the Buddhist point of view, it's pisunavacha. I mean, what these other guys are doing, not with Styx, he's got his own messed up situation he's wallowing in. But these other people who are like maybe even making a living through just sort of like mocking and sneering at somebody else. And in some cases, it's people that aren't as messed up as Styx is. I don't know, it makes me feel uncomfortable. It just makes me feel like, I don't know, it's kind of listening to somebody telling lies. And from the Buddhist point of view, telling lies and also like malicious gossip against someone or just, bad-mouthing someone behind their back kind of stuff. I mean, both of them fit under musawada or wrong speech. So I just, as a Buddhist, I mean, you might not really see that. I mean, you don't have to just tell lies in order to indulge in wrong speech. I mean, there's other ways, other kinds of wrong speech. And I mean, it can guide you away from that kind of stuff, even if, I mean, you don't really see the point of it yet. Or, you don't see the point of why not, pilfer pens from the office, that kind of thing. But, in Buddhism, it's like, do not take what is not given. And so you just follow that. And I mean, it can help you. I mean, if you just get like really obsessive about it and cling to it, where you're just like despising other people because you see them as not living up to your ideals and so forth, that's not good either. But ethical philosophy, I mean, it can help to guide you to live a better life, I suppose. And I mean, it's like I was saying earlier, where in answer to the previous question, it's if you have a philosophy that holds out, that like reminds you, this is not the highest truth. There is a higher truth, and if you can strive for that and you can attain that. And so, I mean, philosophies like that, that are ethical and practical, with some metaphysics thrown in, like this is not the highest truth, or just basic stuff like to exist is to suffer, first noble truth, second noble truth. Whenever you are unhappy, it's because you want something. You desire something. And so just a little self-reflection. What is it that I desire? You're unhappy. Just, well, what do I want? What is it that I'm desiring that's causing me to be unhappy? And I mean, just a little bit of reflection. I mean, it could be something stupid. It's like it's raining. You wanted to go outside and do something, and then it started raining, and so now you're pissed off. It's like, fuck. I was gonna ride my bike, or I was gonna, go out and do this or that, and now it's raining, and so you're unhappy. But all the unhappiness in the world isn't gonna make it stop raining. So I mean, you just like examine your own thoughts in accordance with Buddhist philosophy. And then you can see this stuff. that a lot of people wouldn't even notice. They just think that because it's raining, they're necessarily unhappy. It's just somehow made them be unhappy. They're just victimized. But in reality, I mean, so you're closer to the truth if you realize that, I'm not unhappy because it's raining. I'm unhappy because I want it to not be raining. So, yeah. And then, of course, just having some grounding in logical thought helps you to weed out a lot of bullshit, I guess. But, metaphysics, I mean, one of the main benefits of metaphysics is just reminding you that this isn't reality. That there is a higher reality than this, a higher truth than walls and TV sets and plants and fireplaces, shirts, people. So yeah, I mean, it's useful in helping you to have right view. It helps you to guide your practice. Helps you. It's like a map that can at least guide you in the right direction. Give you the idea that you should be moving in a certain direction. Not just wallow in samsara and think that this is ultimate reality. So, I guess I just am going to move on to the next question, since those two questions were pretty much almost the same question. So, Robert's third question is, I've heard you talk about Evola in the past. What is your view on traditionalism? Well, traditionalism with a capital T, I'm really not well versed in. I've read about it a little bit. I know Evola was into it. I think Gwenon was even more into traditionalism. I think Gwenon just insisted upon it. But I mean, following traditions, it stabilizes society. If you've got most people on the same page with regard to their conduct, then that definitely strengthens the society, although a society also has to be flexible. That if you just stay completely conservative and refuse to make any like revisions or refinements or innovations to the system, then other cultures are going to evolve past you and then start out competing you. That was one of the strengths of the Romans, is when they're in contact with another culture, like they're at war with another culture, then if they had something that worked really well, especially like in military technology, the Romans adopted it. So the Romans were traditionalistic and conservative in a lot of ways, but at the same time, they were flexible. They were able to make adjustments to the tradition, at least to certain aspects of the tradition. So, yeah, I mean, tradition, just a small t traditionalism, it does like stabilize and strengthen a society so long as it doesn't ossify and just become something inflexible. So the way America used to be was a good kind of traditional. It was like, I can't remember what's something. Yeah, I can't remember the exact name of what I'm trying to get at, what America used to stand for. It wasn't so much ethnic nationalism. It was civic nationalism, where everyone agrees on certain ideals, human rights and liberty, and everyone's equal under the law, and everyone should have equal opportunities, even though everyone's not going to be strictly exactly equal, at least with regard to, protection of the laws and having rights and so forth. Everyone should be equal. That kind of thing. That was like a stable and very flexible, kind of a vague but still idealistic and useful kind of traditionalism that held sway up until cultural Marxists started undermining all of it. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Ethiopian Fake Tig. An Ethiopian Fake Tig says, in the added rules that came to be after the Buddha decided to include women in the Sangha, why was the rule that a female monk of 100 years of seniority has to bow down to the male monk that was ordained that very same day? that was partly just to make sure that the nuns knew that they were subsidiary to the bhikkhus, I suppose. And there have been people arguing that this set of rules, that even the most senior nun has to bow down to the most junior monk, they were added later by sort of misogynistic monks that didn't like nuns in Buddhism, that kind of thing. But I mean, even like a fully ordained nun is not allowed to sit in the presence of a bhikkhu. And then, of course, the bhikkhunis nowadays just ignore these kind of rules. But I mean, they have to remain standing in the presence of a bhikkhu. And partly that was cultural. Ancient India, it was patriarchal. Men were superior to women, or they were seen by tradition as superior to women, at least in certain respects. I mean, the Buddha admitted women can get enlightened just like men can, and so an enlightened woman would be superior to an unenlightened man. She'd be superior to almost all men, at least with regard to wisdom. But I mean, it was also part of the strictness of the rules for nuns to ensure that women that weren't really serious about just renouncing everything, renouncing their status, renouncing the world, and just wholeheartedly committing themselves to living a life striving for enlightenment. The ones that weren't that serious would get weeded out. And so, it was just kind of humbling to them, just another little weeding out process, I guess. And I'm falling back on the emergency backup beverage. So, yeah, I mean, I really can't say for sure what was going on in the minds of whoever it was, possibly the Buddha himself, who came up with a rule that even a senior female monk or a senior nun has to bow down to a junior monk, or even a senior nun is not allowed to sit in the presence of even a junior monk. And also, I mean, no nun is even allowed to sit cross-legged. I'm sure that there are very few of the new bhikkhunis who follow that rule. But we don't need to get into that. So anyways, I'm just going to move on to Ethiopian Fake Tig's next question, which is thoughts on the Disney classic Aladdin? And the answer to that is no. I don't have any thoughts about the Disney classic Aladdin because I never saw it. I saw the old Jungle Book, but I never saw Aladdin. So I don't really have any thoughts about it. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. Also from Ethiopian Fake Tig. Sometimes I get confused with regard to his name. So, EFT says, is it allowable for monks to listen to EDM or pop music? And I had to look up EDM, and it stands for electronic dance music. And the answer is, monks shouldn't make any effort to listen to any kind of music. In fact, it's against the rules even for monks to chant in a musical manner. So any kind of musical, sing-song kind of chanting is also out for a strict Buddhist monk. But let's say a monk is walking through a village and a festival is going on and music is being played. He can listen to that so long as he didn't go there just to listen to it. I mean, so long as that was not his purpose for being there, then he can be somewhere, music can be playing, and he can listen to it, and he's not breaking any rules. It's just that he's not supposed to be making an effort to listen to music or to play music or to sing or dance, that kind of stuff. Because Buddhism is one of the few spiritual traditions that considers music to be essentially unwholesome and immoral because you are wallowing in sensuality by indulging in it. But I assume listening to some kind of some sort of ambient techno trance music, which I listen to sometimes as a monk. This is kind of background music if I was typing or something. I mean, you're better off listening to that than like that throat screechy death metal stuff. At least it's a somewhat more refined form of unwholesomeness. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is the last question. And this is from Cyrus Frame. And Cyrus Frame says, what do you think of this koan? And I'm going to take a drink before I say the koan. Okay. What do you think of this koan? And the koan is as follows. Janjan said, is it like... No, I messed up already. I did the name almost correctly, and then I screwed up in the first little words. Okay, I'll start over. Janjan said, it is like a man up a tree. He is hanging from a branch by his teeth. His hands do not grasp a limb. His feet do not touch the trunk. A man beneath the tree asks him, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West? If he stays silent, he fails the man. If he does answer, he will lose his life. What would you do in such a situation? And that's the koan. And it's from the Gateless Gate, better known probably as the Mumonkan. And in the Japanese translation, the Zen master is Kyogen, not Janjan. So it's case 5 of the Mumonkan. And I mean, a koan is a question or a riddle that really does not have a correct answer. So in my case, I mean, I just keep my mouth shut, stay up in the tree, and not die. I mean, what would be the point of trying to answer the guy? I mean, you're going to be dead before you get to the end of the answer anyway. But the question is not supposed to have a correct answer. It's like a no-win scenario. But, I mean, I could tell you what Mumon says, which is as follows. Case 5, Kyogen's man up a tree. Mumon's comment to that is, even if your eloquence flows like a river, it is of no avail. Though you can expound the whole of Buddhist literature, it is of no use. If you solve this problem, you will give life to the way that has been dead until this moment, and destroy the way that has been alive up to now. Otherwise, you must wait for Maitreya Buddha and ask him. And then Mumon's verse, Kyogen is truly thoughtless. His vice and poison are endless. He stops up the mouths of the monks, and devil's eyes sprout from their bodies. But when Mumon says someone is truly thoughtless, it's actually kind of praise, because you're supposed to be thoughtless, I guess. But what's the actual question here? What do I think about it? Yeah, what do I think of this koan? It's not one of my favorite koans. You know, it's just kind of like a no-frills kind of a koan. You know, it's like you're hanging from a tree by your teeth. Somebody asks you a question about Buddhism. So what do you do? If you try to answer, you fall and die. But if you don't answer, it's like you're not sharing Dhamma with another being. But I mean, technically, if you tried to answer, you'd be falling out of the tree and dying before you could answer anyway. So it's really not one of my favorite koans. I've got lots of koans that I like better than that one. But, you know, it's just a standard example of a riddle or a question that really does not have a correct answer. And so you got to like short circuit your rational thinking mind in order to get past the impasse, essentially. And I'm not sure what the correct answer would be. I mean, it would depend on you and the circumstances and the Roshi who's asking you the question. You know, it might be the correct answer. Like you go down, you sit down in front of the Roshi, and the Roshi says, you know, the man beneath the tree asks, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West? If you stay silent, you fail. If you do answer, you die. What will you do? And it may be the correct answer. It'll just be like, good morning, Roshi. Or whatever it is, because there really is no correct answer. It's just a matter of like short-circuiting the intellect and just breaking through the log jam, I guess. But yeah, there's plenty of koans I like better than that one. Like Tozan's, what is it, 60 Blows. It's one of my favorites. But anyways, that's it. We are done. And so, like I should always say at the beginning, and pretty much never do, if you have any questions you think I can answer about Buddhism, Dharma, Theravada, early Buddhism, just philosophy in general, I guess, meditation. Did I already say meditation? Just me personally, Burma, that kind of stuff. If you think there's a good chance I can answer it. Disney movies, not so much. I'm not really an authority on Disney movies. Then feel free to ask the question though. And I will do my best to answer, inshallah. No more than 3 questions per person per episode, please. And if you like this kind of stuff, feel free to like and subscribe if you have not done so already. And like I have been saying, my next book will be coming out in the next few weeks. I hope. Fingers crossed. It's been a while, but we're down to the wire at this point. And all I can say after that, I suppose, is be happy.